Kamusta kayong lahat and welcome to another review for board exam, and we will have psychological assessment for today. Since ready ka na, simulan na natin. Psychological assessment review questions. Number 1. Most psychologists and counselors would agree that letter A. More preschool IQ testing is necessary. B. Teachers need to give more personality tests. C. More public education is needed in the area of testing. And letter D. The testing mystique has been beneficial to the general public. Number 2. Which of the following would be an informal method of appraisal? Is it A. IQ testing, B. Standardized personality testing, C. GRE scores, or letter D. A checklist? Number 3. The WAIS-III is given to 100,000 individuals in the United States who are picked at random. A psychometrician would expect that letter A. Approximately 68% would score between 85 and 115. Letter B. Approximately 68% would score between 70 and 130. Letter C. The mean IQ would be 112. And letter D. 50% of those tested would score 112 or above. Number 4. A word association test would be an example of A. A neuropsychological test, B. A motoric test, C. An achievement test, or letter D. A projective test. Number 5. An infant IQ test are A. More reliable than those given later in life, B. More unreliable than those given later in life, C. Not related to learning experiences, and letter D. Never used. Number 6. A good practice for psychometricians is A. To always test the client yourself rather than referring the client for testing, B. Never generalize based on a single test scores, C. Stay away from culture-free tests, or letter D. Stay away from scoring the test yourself. Number 7. You want to admit only 25% of all psychologists to an advanced training program in psychodynamic group therapy. The item difficulty of the entrance exam for applicants would be best set at A. 0.0, B. 0.5, C. 1.0, or letter D. 0.25. Number 8. A client goes to a string of 14 chemical dependency centers that operate on the 12-step model. When his current therapy suggests a new inpatient program, the client responds with, "What for? I already know the 12 steps." The client is using A. Deductive logic, B. Inductive logic, C. An emphatic assertion, or D. An I statement. Number 9. Lewis Terman A. Constructed the Wechsler's test, B. Constructed the initial Binet prior to 1910, C. Constructed the Rorschach, or letter D. Americanized the Binet. Number 10. In constructing a test, you notice that all 75 people correctly answered item number 12. This gives you an item difficulty of A. 1.2, B. 0.75, C. 1.0, or letter D. 0.0. Number 11. The most valuable type of research is A. Always conducted using a factor analysis, B. Conducted using the chi-square, C. The experiment used to discover cause and effect relationship, or D. The quasi-experiment. Number 12. Experiments emphasize parsimony, which means A. Interpreting the result in the simplest way. B. Interpreting the results in the most complex manner. C. Interpreting the result using a correlation coefficient. Or letter D. Interpreting the results using a clinical interview. Number 13. Occam razors suggest that experimenters A. Interpret the result in the simplest manner. B. Interpret the results in the most complex manner. C. Interpret the results using a correlation coefficient. Or letter D. Interpret the results using a clinical interview. Number 14. A counselor educator is running an experiment to test a new form of counseling. Unknown to the experimenter, one of the clients is secretly seeing a gestural therapist. This experiment, A, is parsimonious. B, an example of Occam razor. C, is confounded or flawed. Or D, is valid and will most likely help the field of counseling. And last, number 15, non-directive is to person-centered, as A, psychological testing is to counseling. B, confounding is to experimenting. C, appraisal is to research. Or D, parsimony is to Occam's razor. And let's now proceed to answers and explanations. Number 1. Most psychologists and counselors would agree that, and the answer is letter C. More public education is needed in the area of testing. Public need to know that there are limitations of testing or assessment. Many people are thinking that knowing your score represents who you are. Many people have been harmed by hearing their scores or their IQs because they don't know what it means. That is why it is very important and significant for us as counselors, psychometricians, and psychologists to explain the test results in the manner that they would understand it. Number 2. Which of the following would be informal method of appraisal? And the answer is letter D, a checklist. Unlike A, B, and C, the informal method does not use standardized administration or scoring procedure, like doing a checklist or a diary, or there are so many ways that go about it that is totally in different manner. Unlike an informal testing, which is standardized in administration, scoring, and interpretation. Number 3. The WAIS-III is given to 100,000 individuals in the US who are picked at random. A psychometrician would expect that. And the answer is letter A. Approximately 68% would score between 85 and 115. First, the Westler's IQ has been administered to a very large group of people, so chances are the distribution of score will be normal. This tells that the mean score will be 100, like an average IQ, and the standard deviation would be 15. So if the question were asked about Binet, you'd use 16 as a standard deviation. Number 4, a word association test would be an example of, and the answer is letter D, a projective test. Although it is rare, some texts and exam take issues with the archaic word projective and refer to the test as self-expressive. Number 5, infant tests are, and the answer is letter B, more unreliable than those given later in life. These toddler tests are sometimes capable of picking up gross abnormalities such as serious mental retardation. Number 6, a good practice for psychometricians is, and the answer is letter B, never generalize based on a single test score. We usually give batteries of tests to provide relevant assessment. There's no single test that would explain a personality of an individual. Number 7, if you want to admit 25% of all psychologists to an advanced training program in psychodynamic group, and the answer would be letter D, 0.25. In most tests, the level is set at 0.5, like 50% of the examinee would answer 50% correctly. However, in this case, since what you are looking for is 25%, 0.25 level would allow you to ferret out lower than 75%. You do not wish to admit item difficulty could range from 0 to 1.0. Number 8. A client goes to a string of 14 chemical dependency centers that operate on a 12-step model. When his current therapy suggests a new inpatient program, the client responded with, "What for? I already know the 12 steps the client is using." And the answer is letter A, deductive logic. Deductive, which sounds a bit like reductive, reduces the general to the specific. These questions would have been answered using deductive if the researcher observed many clients being cured. Number 9, Lewis Terman. And the answer is letter D, Americanized Binet. Since Terman was associated with Stanford University, the test became the Stanford Binet. Number 10. In constructing a test, you notice that all 75 people correctly answered item number 12. Description item difficulty of, and the answer is 1.0. Letter C. The item difficulty index is calculated by taking the number of persons tested who answered the item correctly over the total number of persons tested. Hence, in this case, 75 over 75 is equals to 1.0, which is the maximum score for an item. Number 11, the most valuable type of research is, and the answer is letter C, the experiment used to discover cause and effect relationship. Experimental research is the process of gathering data in order to make evaluative comparison regarding different situations. An experiment must have the condition of treatment controlled via the experimenter and random assignment, also known as randomization, that is used in groups. Number 12. Experiments emphasize parsimony, which means, and the answer is letter A, interpreting the results in the simplest way. In research, we strive for parsimony in the sense that the easiest and less complex explanation is said to be the best. An economical description, if you will. Simply put, the simplest explanation of the findings is always preferred. Number 13, Occam's razor suggests that experimenters, and the answer is letter A, interpret the result in the simplest manner. Often, parsimony is also referred to Occam's razors, the principle of economy, or Lloyd Morgan's 1894 canon, or the law. Canon Lloyd Morgan was an English psychologist, physiologist, while Occam was the 14th century philosopher and theologian. Number 14. A counselor educator is running an experiment to test a new form of counseling. Unknown to the experiment, one of the clients in the study is secretly seeing a gestural therapist. This experiment, and the answer is letter C, confounded or flawed. The experiment is said to be invalid due to the extraneous independent variable, like attending the gestural therapy. Variables which are undesirable or compound or flaw the experiment. The only experimental variable should be the independent variable. In this case, the new form of counseling. The independent variable must have the effect on the dependent variable. And last, number 15, non-directive is to person-centered as, and the answer is letter D, parsimony is to Occam's razor. A simple analogy question. Non-directive and person-centered therapy are synonymous. Both refer to the name given to Rogerian counseling. Parsimony is roughly synonymous with Occam's razor. And there goes the end of our drill for today. I hope you enjoyed learning, and don't forget, pakitype nyo naman yung score ninyo. Don't forget to click subscribe and hit the notification bell para sa mga update ng drills natin. Keep safe and have a nice day.